Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. We are going to give folks another minute or two to log on. Okay, right. We are at 10:01, so I will go ahead and get started and let folks join. Thank you so much for attending this webinar with us, the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative. My name is Madison Hammett. I am a policy analyst with the collaborative, and we are so excited to welcome Aggie Stewart, who will be talking to us, as you can see, about yoga as a practice for cultivating resilience and well-being. And just to preemptively say, I'm sure you can imagine we're all doing this from home, so thank you ahead of time for your patience with any tech issues we run into. But just a little bit about this webinar and the series it's a part of. So this is the third in our series on burnout and well-being that we've been hosting here at the collaborative in the beginning, or since the beginning of the year. Back in February, our director, Laura Altman, and Dr. Audrey Stillerman gave an overview of what burnout is and how it can impact your work as a healthcare provider or a social service provider, and then also some things that we can do to mitigate or prevent trauma and burnout in clinicians. And how organizations can incorporate that into their work plans. In March, we heard from Dr. Linda Graby and Elaine Miller-Karras on their community resilience model and how they've applied it in nursing and social services settings all over the world, really, to prevent burnout and to utilize strengths that are already present in staff to address trauma that they might face on the job. And then today, of course, we'll be hearing from Aggie Stewart, who is an author and a certified yoga therapist and meditation teacher. And she'll be talking about how we can integrate yoga as a trauma-informed wellness practice for practitioners and staff. And I'll just say, you know, we started this burnout series at the beginning of the year, really thinking about all of the burnout and potential trauma that we might face as practitioners, teachers, educators, social service, all of those things. But we also know that right now in the world, everyone is facing the things that we're going to be talking about today, facing feelings of burnout, feelings of trauma potentially. And so, you know, in light of the coronavirus pandemic, I really want to encourage you all to look at our previous webinars on our webinar archive, which you'll get a link to, and really think about how you can integrate these ideas of well-being not only into your work life, but into your everyday life. A little bit about who we are, because I know we've got a lot of new folks joining us. So the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative is housed at Health and Medicine Policy Research Group, which is in downtown Chicago. And we are an organization that, as the name suggests, does policy and research and other work to, targeting the improvement of health in all people in Illinois by promoting the idea of health equity. And the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative does this specifically through looking at how we can build a cross-sector movement to prevent trauma and thriving across the lifespan. And we do that through three tiers: capacity building, so things like trainings and education, policy and advocacy, and then research, translation, and dissemination. And so this webinar series is a part of that. After our webinar, you're going to get a few items from us. You're going to get a short evaluation survey, ways that you can participate in the collaborative. You're going to get links to our website that include some of the policy briefs and education materials and other things that I've talked about. And you'll also get a recording of the presentation and a link to register for our next webinars that are coming up, as well as Aggie will have some additional resources, and so we'll be sharing those with you as well. If you have any questions for Aggie during the webinar, you can type those in on the side panel, and I will be monitoring that throughout the presentation. So please, we encourage you to be, skipping ahead there, we're excited. we encourage you to type your questions in as they come. Aggie and I will be having a Q&A session at the end, so please participate in that. And then, without further ado, our speaker is Aggie Stewart, and she is a certified yoga therapist and meditation teacher. She is also a published author, and she is going to be speaking to us today about how we can take these ideas and integrate them into our daily lives to prevent burnout and trauma. And Aggie, I am going to switch presenters over to you and give you control and let you take it away. So you should be able to share your screen, and it is all you now.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Maddie and Laura, for inviting me to speak about a subject and a practice that's so near and dear to my own heart, not to mention essential for maintaining my own resilience and well-being. I'm delighted to be here and grateful for the opportunity to give something back to all of you here today who continue to serve your community so heroically, particularly during this time of pandemic. So before I go into my prepared remarks about yoga as a practice for cultivating resilience and well-being, I'd like to invite all of us to take a few moments to center and come together as a larger community devoted to helping those who've experienced trauma, and this includes many of us ourselves, to heal and know ourselves to be whole and radiant despite our experiences and challenging circumstances. So I'd like to invite you to take your heart rate before we begin this centering practice. So those of you who would like to take your heart rate, just find a pulse point. It'll be a 30-second count. We'll take this again at the end of the practice as well. Okay, so if you've got your pulse point, then go ahead and start. And stop. All right, so now I'm also going to record this practice, and I'll send it to Maddie as a separate MP3. All right, so there we go. All right, so find a comfortable position, either sitting, lying down, or standing. And as you settle into that comfortable position, feel all the points of contact between your body and the surfaces that are supporting it. Notice if there's anything holding you up and away from those surfaces. And if there is, can you allow yourself to simply soften into them? And then begin to take your attention inward. So your eyes can remain open, gently closed all the way, whatever is best for you in this moment. If your eyes are opened or gently opened, can you allow them to rest on a steady point a few feet in front of you without dropping your head down? Just keep feeling into the comfort of your body, making any adjustments or micro adjustments that will bring you greater ease and comfort in your body. Allow all of your senses now to be wide open to the environment of the room that you're in. So welcoming sounds both inside and outside of the room, perhaps sounds coming from your own body. Welcome sights, even with eyes closed. You might notice a play of light and shadow, dots or swirls of color, perhaps images moving across your mind's eye. Welcome smells, residual tastes and flavors within your mouth, a touch of air upon your skin. And then begin to notice the flow of breath in and out of your body. Perhaps you feel the flow of air and sensation in the nostrils, a feeling of coolness as the breath flows in. a feeling of warmth as the breath flows out. Maybe you notice very natural pauses in the breath after inhale and again after exhale. Or perhaps you notice the sensation of movement in the rib cage and belly as the breath flows in and out. A sensation of expansion as the breath flows in, followed by a bit of stillness. Then the release of the belly and the rib cage as the breath flows out, followed once again by a bit of stillness. Can you stay with the sensations of the flow of breath in whatever way is pleasing and interesting to you? And after a few more rounds of breath, perhaps notice any shifts occurring in the pace and rhythm of your breathing. Or notice a sense of ease coming into the breath. Perhaps even a sense of the body breathing itself. And then release your attention from the breath and feel into the palms of your hands, left and right, and both palms at the same time as one sensation. Perhaps you notice a sense of vibration or a sense of energy within the palms of the hands and radiating off the palms of the hands. If you'd like, place one hand on your heart and the other hand somewhere on your belly, somewhere that feels soothing and comforting. And feel into the way the warmth and energy in the palms of your hands meets the warmth and energy over your heart center and your belly. And as you feel this, also feel into your connection to yourself. And then feel into your connection with others present here on this webinar today, this like-minded community. Feel into your connection with your loved ones, people, pets, both nearby and far away. Then release your hands back down to your sides, and in your own timing, begin to open and close your eyes. And take any movement that you feel called to take, and begin to reintegrate into your surroundings. And for those of you taking a heart rate, go ahead and find a pulse point once again. And start. And stop. Right, and if you'd like, you might want to jot down a note or two about the experience you just had. So I'm going to address 4 questions today, starting with what is yoga? And this will include where the practice comes from and the many tools, techniques, and ways of practicing that it encompasses. Then I'll talk a little bit about how yoga works to support resilience and well-being. And after that, I'll share some ideas about what yoga practice can look like, some of which might surprise you, but I also hope will inspire you to practice and know the effects of the practice in your own system so that you can share it with those you serve from a place of felt experience. And then lastly, I'll offer some further ideas about how your organizations can support your members and those they serve to practice yoga. So what is this practice that we call yoga? Well, despite popular depictions and ideas of yoga as a physical practice of exercise that emphasizes stretching, yoga's true realm is the mind. and the integrated mind-body-spirit experience of being human. Yoga is a mind-body practice of contemplative meditation that is part of the wisdom traditions, which includes other spiritual practices such as Tai Chi and Qigong. When I talk about meditation, what I'm referring to is the experience of focusing the mind on a single point and then sustaining that single point of focus for a prolonged period of time. You can think of yoga as a form of mental training in which you're developing the muscle of attention to disengage with the thinking mind in favor of staying with the experience of sensing and the awareness of sensation. There are all kinds of ways to do this, so that yoga offers not one, but many paths to the mountaintop, so to speak, wherein stillness and peace can be found. So there are a number of popular misconceptions about meditation and the goal of meditation. Perhaps the most common is that the goal of meditation is to stop thinking. Well, this is just simply not possible. The thinking mind is designed to think. That's its job. That's its function. Well, that said, we can disengage from our thoughts. We can release our attention from the thinking mind and not get involved with its various activities, whether that involves thoughts or memories or images or any other kind of mental activity. We can be aware of that activity, but choose not to engage with it, to become instead an observing presence, witnessing this activity coming and going, much like we might watch cloud formations moving and changing in the sky, while the sky itself remains what it is, unchanging, open, vast, and spacious. And then through the experience of single-pointed focus, where we've let go of the thinking mind, we can further release into the ineffable experience of being, simply being vast and open spaciousness, in which we feel deeply connected to ourselves, others, and all of life. So what I'm describing is actually a very natural experience, one that most of us have had in some form or another. It's an experience of being fully present, yet absorbed in whatever it is we're engaged with, whether it's some form of creative expression or problem solving, or perhaps feeling completely absorbed in an experience in nature, or with a newborn child, or out in a garden on a beautiful day. So that there is this deep sense of connection and ease and peace, and perhaps even joy. So this is true healing space where we connect to our innate wholeness and radiance, a wholeness and radiance that is untouched by the human experience while remaining very much a part of it. The yoga teachings say that this experience of our essential wholeness and radiance is what we forget and why we suffer. And we forget not because we're bad or stupid or in some other way deficient. We forget because we become distracted and fused with the content of our thinking mind and our experience. So textual sources locate yoga's origins in the South Asia from around the 15th to the 12th century BCE. And what we know about yoga comes from Vedic texts such as the 4 Vedas, the Upanishads, which are a part of the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. I'll be saying more about the key role of the Yoga Sutra in what we know about yoga practice in just a moment. So yoga's evolution as a concept and practice has been anything but pure and linear, which is true even to this day. While there are a number of traditions and lineages in yoga, they share a common philosophy and practices, even while they may offer different modes of practice. The story of yoga's evolution is one of adaptation and appropriation, which is true, again, even to this day. For the better part of its 2,500-year evolution, yoga's practices have been a blend of shared cultural practices from all over South Asia. You'll see commonalities across spiritual traditions, such as Buddhism and yoga. For example, you'll find a similar practice of the 4 virtues: friendliness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. You'll find this in Buddhism as well as yoga. You'll see other commonalities or crossovers in things like breathing practices, known as pranayama, and gestures that are held to manipulate the flow of vital energies in the body, which are known as mudras, and other gestures known as nyasa. So yoga itself is a Sanskrit word that has multiple meanings, several of which point to important aspects of the practice. Its most common meaning is joining or attaching. Our English word yoke is cognate of yoga. Yoga also indicates means, method, or way, pointing to a path or process of practice. And it also connotes discipline and diligence. So like anything else we practice, yoga requires consistency and perseverance. This is actually stated explicitly in the teachings of yoga, that we need to practice consistently over a long period of time. So as a practice, yoga refers to both process and state. So it's both a verb and a noun. The process referring to how we practice, both in terms of the steps we take in the practice, as well as our attitude toward the practice while we're practicing. And I'll come back to this point a little later. The teachings of yoga are said to be for all people for all time, as relevant today as they have been throughout its 2,500-year history. And precisely because humans have a nervous system and a brain that functions much as it did for the ancient yogis, who through their own experiences figured out a lot which Western science is only just starting to validate. Much of what the ancient yogis figured out about the mind and how it functions, and the two-way communication that occurs between mind and body, body and mind, was distilled into teachings, and many of these were compiled into what is considered to be the seminal source for the practice of yoga. And this is the text, the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, which dates from approximately 325 to 425 CE. Patanjali is revered as a sage, although it's unknown whether he actually lived or not. Nonetheless, we can think of the Yoga Sutra as a manual for yoga practice. This text contains 4 sections of aphorisms or brief, pithy statements, each of which contain a teaching. There are approximately 195 aphorisms across all 4 sections. The first 2 sections and part of the third delineate the path of practice and provide an in-depth look at how the mind works. In particular, what leads toward clear perception of self, others, and the world around us, and what leads away from it. Some consider the Yoga Sutra to be a work of depth psychology. So it delineates the path or process of practice of meditation as one involving 8 steps or limbs, as you see listed here. So I want to underscore that this practice and the process of practice is not a linear one, as we often move back and forth in practice from distraction to focus, back to distraction, and then back to focus again. Ultimately, however, meditative absorption relies on the elements that precede it, whether or not those elements have been a specific deliberate part of the practice. So for example, we may not actively do something in our practice to withdraw our senses from their objects, but when we're in a state of meditative absorption, we remain awake, alert, and aware of what's coming in through the senses while remaining uninvolved with their objects. For example, while we're in a meditative state, we can hear birdsong, or we may hear birdsong, without starting to think about the birdsong, such as wondering what type of bird is singing. And we can hear that bird song without reacting to what the bird song triggers emotionally, such as a memory or anticipating some future event. All this, of course, is much easier said than done, which is why we practice. And there is tremendous benefit that comes from practice, regardless of the outcome of practice, such as benefits to our nervous system and physiologic function. So our mind is powerful. Its activity challenging to harness. On any given day, it can take a lot to quiet it and prepare it for meditation. Different people need different support, and that needed support can vary from day to day. So it helps to have a wide range of tools, techniques, and methods to support us in practice. So what I've listed here are some of the more common tools and techniques, and I'll say a little bit about each. So movement or posture in particular, movement that is coordinated with the breath, can be particularly effective preparation. Coordination of movement and breath, where movement is synced with the breath and becomes an extension of the breath, is deeply soothing and calming for the nervous system, even when we're doing more vigorous or strenuous movement. We can use specific breathing practices, such as alternate side body awareness, in which we shift our attention from one side of the body to the other as we breathe, or we can open and close our hands to the rhythm of our breathing. There are specific techniques for honing focus and concentration. These can include such things as using contralateral movement in posture practice, or incorporating balance postures. We can rest our gaze on a steady point if our eyes are opened or fully or partially, or we can use the repetition of a mantra or aphorism. So these are just some examples of focusing techniques. Mantra has other very specific uses, very powerful and potent uses, such as evoking specific feeling and eliciting specific meaning that can help to shift the trajectory of thought. Gestures such as mudra and nyasa can also be used in ways to prepare the mind for meditation. And then, of course, adding an element of ritual has tremendous benefits, not least of which is bringing important dimensions of predictability and safety to the practice while elevating its importance and meaning. We can also incorporate inquiry and self-reflection. These are other really important tools of practice that help us to develop discrimination, healthy self-awareness, insight, and new perspective. And then, of course, there's quite a range of specific meditation techniques. For instance, using the breath as a focal point. This, breath as a focal point is really the single most common focal point used in meditation practice today. We can also use as a focal point the visualization of someone or something that inspires us. And again, these are just a couple of examples. There are many, many, many. So each of these elements lends a calming and grounding effect to the practice, signaling both body and mind that it's safe to release into a meditative state. In general, we can think of movement as a means of quieting the body and the breath and preparing the breath for breathing practices. And we can think of breathing practices as a preparation of the mind for meditation. That said, any one of these tools can be used as a preparatory practice. So there are so many ways that yoga practice supports our resilience and well-being, starting with it being a practice of mindfulness, one that interrupts our active engagement with the outer world and shifts our attention inward to ourself and our relationship with ourself. This is especially important when our circumstances are stressful, whether for a brief period of time or more chronically, as it is for those in the health professions, other first responders, and still others in education and social service professions. Interrupting engagement with the outer world becomes even more important and necessary in times of crisis, as we find ourselves in now with the coronavirus pandemic. Yoga practice supports developing a relationship with ourself that is kind, loving, and compassionate. And as we develop these qualities with ourselves, we're better able to act on those qualities with others. There is very compelling research on self-compassion that bears this out and also debunks a lot of common myths about self-compassion leading to selfishness or self-centeredness, laziness, or increased empathic distress in the face of the suffering of others. As an internal practice, yoga supports becoming grounded. So important always, but even more so when we're feeling anxious, pressed, afraid, or experiencing any number of other hyper-aroused states. The practice also supports developing increasing subtle sensorial interoceptive awareness. So everything we encounter and experience emerges first as sensation in the body. Yoga practice teaches us how to read our bodies at the level of sensation so that we can be more responsive rather than reactive in any given moment. Yoga practice also promotes healthy functional breathing, that is, breathing that is nasal, diaphragmatic, and abdominal, breathing that is low, slow, rhythmic, and gently paused after exhale. This is opposed to breathing that is short, shallow, and irregular, focused in the upper chest and or occurs through the mouth. So by promoting healthy functional breathing, yoga practice also slows thought and other mental activity, making it easier to release from the thinking mind, to take a critical step back into observing and witnessing, from which we can take perspective, see something in a new way, gain insight, or make a thoughtful choice or decision about any action we feel we need to take or not take. And the open secret about the practice is that it facilitates autonomic balance. Depending on how the tools, techniques, and methods are approached and combined, we can regulate how much parasympathetic brake pedal we need to apply and how much sympathetic accelerator we need to apply to bring our systems into balance. Yoga practice can be shaped to help us rest, digest, replenish, and restore. It can also be shaped to help us build, invigorate, and nourish. And it can be shaped to do both, rest and replenish, nourish, build, and invigorate. Given the focus on our inner landscape, so to speak, on our relationship with ourself and our felt lived experience in and through our bodies, the practice helps us develop self-knowledge, such as what our bodies feel like when we experience anxiety or fear or overwhelm, and how to ground and find the qualities we need in those moments, such as courage, perseverance, even faith. It can help us develop these qualities and those personal strengths, such as the courage to speak out about an injustice, or to voice a personal need, or to develop the ability to experience joy even amidst challenging or trying circumstances. And so important, it can help us to develop discernment. That is, the ability to know when something we perceive is actually true. A classic example from the yoga teachings is the metaphor of mistaking a coiled rope for a snake or vice versa. The perception leads to different actions and thus to different outcomes. The practice also helps us develop other important skills, such as the ability to pause, ground, and regain presence, which enables us to make thoughtful choices and decisions rather than reactive ones. And as we develop the ability to know ourselves from the inside, to read our body sensations, we can know via felt sense the experience of presence and well-being. So these experiences of presence and well-being, they're always there. And we can learn how to reconnect to these innate experiences by simply taking a moment to uncover and rediscover them. So yoga practice supports resilience and well-being because when we combine its tools and techniques, the practice works in an integrated way on all dimensions of our system. And if we're practicing mindfully, we're always using more than one tool, focused attention and breath at a minimum. The ancient yogis identified 5 dimensions that comprise our human system. The first dimension is our anatomy. The next dimension is our physiology. The next, our senses, emotions, and the part of our brain that receives, processes, and stores sensory data and makes it available as retrievable information. The fourth dimension, which comprises our personality and the parts of our brain involved in creativity, formation of values, problem solving, and decision making. And then a 5th dimension through which we experience joy, and again, that ineffable experience of oneness, as well as informed intuition and insight. This integrated and holistic model is comparable to the Western biopsychosocial model of health and aligns with the WHO's definition of health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Although this graphic would suggest that each of these dimensions is separate, as the ancient yogis envisioned our multidimensional system, they saw it as an integrated whole in which each dimension pervades and interpenetrates every other dimension. So it's impossible really to separate them. This model affirms the mind-body-spirit connection, and given the pervading, interpenetrating relationship among all the dimensions, the yoga teachings talk about how what we do in one dimension affects all dimensions. So what we're aiming for in our yoga practice over time is balance, balance within each dimension, and then balance and integration across all dimensions. This model also affirms our lived felt experience of well-being, and importantly, the inherent wisdom of taking a holistic systems view of health and wellness. I'd like to highlight in particular the dimension of physiology, which is the yellow section of the graphic. So the ancients saw this dimension as the interface between the dimension of the body and the dimensions of the mind and spirit. So central to this dimension, they saw the key role played by the respiratory function and its impact on the nervous system and other key physiologic systems such as the immune system. To address this key role, they developed the practice of pranayama, or breathing practices to regulate autonomic function. As Hatha Yoga was originally practiced, pranayama was the primary tool for preparing for meditation. The yogis who evolved the practice of Hatha Yoga recognized that health in the body affected health in the mind and vice versa, and our ability to clarify our perceptions as well as know ourselves and our true nature. So what can yoga practice look like? Well, it can take a number of formats. We can practice in groups. Obviously, right now, in-person classes aren't happening, but many are happening online, both live and recorded. We can also engage in personalized home practice, and we can engage in micro practices. These are very small practices that take anywhere from a moment to 5 or 10 minutes and can be practiced anytime and anywhere. So the length of practice can vary as well. So group practices can go anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes, home practice anywhere from about 5 minutes to 60 minutes, and micro practices again anywhere from a single moment to 5 or 10 minutes. How often do we want to practice? Well, what I've listed here are just some broad recommendations, but ideally what we want to do is integrate yoga practice into our lifestyle, to make it part of the way we live our lives, which is to say that we want to develop the skill of self-awareness, the ability to read our body and to take responsive action when we feel we're off kilter or out of balance in some way by doing some kind of practice. Well, there's not a lot of research on the dose-response relationship of yoga practice. The little that there is suggests that regular practice, practicing what I refer to as little and often, has a big impact over time. Any practice we do, no matter the length, will have a post-practice effect, so an immediate effect, which is terrific. But the bigger transformational shifts seem to occur incrementally over time. And like any skill, we need to continue practicing it to maintain it. So this idea of little and often is really a really good goal. The other advantage to taking this little and often approach is that we'll do it. We'll actually do it. So the shorter our practice is, the more, we'll actually make sure we do it. When we can always find small moments or a few minutes to check in with ourselves, to read our bodies, and to respond with loving kindness and compassion to whatever it is we're experiencing and feeling. So a lot more research has been done on other forms of meditation and self-compassion. So I want to call out the work of Richie Davidson at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Rick Hansen, other people like Linda Graham. Richie Davidson has a couple of really terrific books, The Emotional Life of the Brain and Altered Traits, in which he goes into the research on the health benefits of meditation. All of these books, Rick Hansen's book, Buddha's Brain, Hardwiring Happiness, Resilience, they're all very accessibly written, not to mention incredibly inspiring. All very well worth your reading time. And I believe many of these are also available as audiobooks. So I'll be putting together a list of resources that will include these and other things as well. And I'll want suggestions from you as well as to what I can include on that list. So these are a few ideas for micro practice. As you can see, they're pretty simple and straightforward. They're certainly portable, And best of all, they don't require any equipment or special clothing. So while these micro practices can serve us through the day, they can also be practiced as an adjunct to a longer or more formal practice, and in fact can take elements of a formal practice as a standalone practice. So these are things like a breathing practice or visualizations, the recitation of mantra or aphorisms, breath-mediated postures, even simple momentary pauses in which we simply feel into our being and regain presence is just a beautiful, beautiful micro practice. And each small practice like this contributes to developing the muscle of attention and to building a resilience and felt sense of well-being. So any form of practice that we do should include some key elements. Among them are those I've listed here. So certainly mindfulness. We want our attention to be on our inner experience and on the focus of the practice, whatever that happens to be. It should be somatically oriented. In other words, the emphasis should be on felt sense and developing interoception. The practice should increase calm and decrease markers of stress, for example, lowering heart rate, lowering blood pressure. The practice should also bring our breath to a steady, rhythmic, low, slow flow with an increased pause after the exhale. Our practice should also be quieting the thinking mind. In other words, slowing down thought, allowing it to become more coherent, less reactive, giving us time to make thoughtful choices and decisions. And again, whether it's one practice or practice over time, the movement is towards joy, towards compassion and loving kindness to self and to others. So these are just some ideas. I'll include these on the resource handout that I'll be putting together. So there are any number of apps these days that support home practice and micro practices. You'll find them on apps like Insight Timer, Headspace, and Simple Habit. So these are some ways that organizations can support members and those of you serving them to practice yoga. So for example, you can start meetings with a mindful practice of some kind. For example, someone giving an inspiring reading, or you can do a breathing practice together. Have a simple check-in, see how people are doing that day. You can ask people to share something that brought a smile or a felt sense of joy to them that day. You can provide a quiet and silent, clean, well-lighted place for people to practice in by themselves or in groups. Or you can consider bringing in a professional yoga educator to offer classes and private one-to-one sessions. If you're going to do this, offering these opportunities at a range of times is certainly helpful so that everybody can participate. You can also consider offering reimbursement for classes, whether online or in person. You can post inspiring quotes and stories that are contributed by community members, inspiring quotes and stories about all kinds of things, whether it's their own personal practice or other things that they found in some way uplifting. You can share anonymous stories about what community members are doing to practice. You can offer a mindful practice tip of the day or the week. You can share and teach what you know about practice, again, from your own experience to those you serve and encourage them to practice. So that's everything I have for you today in a prepared way. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Aggie. And folks, if you have questions, I see some of you have already typed some in. Please feel free to send in your questions, comments, anything you'd like to talk about. So just to get us started, because I see some have come in, we had a question about folks who might find yoga to be maybe intimidating or not as welcoming. And so to kind of build off that, I'm wondering what, if any, advice you have for organizations or for just individuals who might face resistance from both the people participating, but also the organization as a whole, because of this perception of, oh, yoga isn't for me, yoga's not welcoming, I feel uncomfortable in it.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really great question. And I think so much of it depends on, frankly, on the person teaching and how they invite those coming to the practice to come into the practice. So, and there are all kinds of ways you can present yoga in an organization without even calling it yoga. So you don't have to even use that word, which will, may trigger some of these ideas about yoga not being for me, or it being too complicated or too hard. I'm not flexible. I can't, stop thinking. Whatever their reasons are for not doing it. So you can design, mindful activities. And really the key is mindfulness, where you're inviting people into exploring their own inner experience and releasing stress and tension in the body and mind.
Great, thank you. And to kind of build off of that too, even though your presentation just showed us that this is not true, but there is a perception in the United States in particular of yoga being something that is the realm of, upper middle class white people, and not something that is welcoming to more diverse communities. And so I was wondering if you had any examples of any communities that have successfully integrated yoga practice that you know of.
Yeah, no, there are all kinds, especially in the Chicago area. I'm very involved with a nonprofit called Yoga Care, which is, whose mission is to take yoga into underserved communities, and to not only bring yoga classes to these communities, but to train individuals from those communities to be teachers and to be going out and teaching in their communities. And over the last 5 years of their existence, they've had tremendous success, and are training more and more teachers, and who are offering more and more classes in their communities. So certainly, we do find, and I mentioned this in the presentation, that, the yoga teachings say that these teachings are for all people and for all time. It's just, in my view, a rather unfortunate outcome that the practice has really sort of landed in a more privileged, white kind of population, but really that the practice is intended for all people for all time. And so there are organizations like Yoga Care. There's another organization in Englewood that is also doing really terrific work. Their name is, I'm blanking on at the moment, but there are all kinds of organizations like this all across the country. If you go onto the website for the Yoga Service Council, you can probably find more information about these kinds of organizations in your local community.
Great, yeah, great, thank you. So we have another question. Can you describe any research linking slow rhythmic breathing and healthy mind-body physiology?
Yeah, there are lots and lots. So I won't go into them here, but I will list some of them on the resource handout that I prepare to send to you guys. But yeah, there's some really compelling evidence there for sure.
Great. Yeah, and folks, again, I see some folks asking for resources and things like that. Aggie will be sending out, she'll be sending me a list of resources she'll be putting together, and that will be in your follow-up email, along with links to the recording, the slides, and other materials. So,
and I'd like to encourage you, if there are specific kinds of resources you want me to send, just let Madison know, and I'll pull together whatever it is you're looking for.
Yes, definitely. Some folks asked if you had any examples of different organizations, particularly healthcare ones, that have integrated yoga practice into their organizational structure. So whether it be part of employee wellness or these timeouts like you talked about, something like that.
Yeah, well, I know that, for instance, the PCC in Chicago has been incorporating yoga for both the people they serve, as well as doing self-care for healthcare presentations for their staff and their clinical and non-clinical staff. I also know that there's work being done over at Heartland Healthcare to incorporate yoga, both again for their patients as well as for staff. Let's see, those are the two that are coming to mind readily. I know that there are others. I know out here in Rhode Island, where I'm based, an increasing number of hospitals are including yoga as part of their wellness program. Yeah, so, and through the employee wellness function, whatever that happens to be.
Great, yeah. We had a question. Can you talk more about the strong sense of introception and the ability to respond optimally to signals of hunger, thirst, pain, etc., and the prevention of addiction and compulsion?
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a really complicated question. But I will say this: that part of developing, internal awareness of sensation and the ability to discriminate, so that if we take an action, it's in our own interest rather than feeding sort of um, a craving or some other need besides one that truly addresses hunger or thirst, for example.
And we had a couple of folks ask if on the resource list they could get some examples of simple exercises, since so many folks who are working in hospitals right now can't bring someone in to teach right now. And so looks like we have a lot of folks who are interested in this, but would like maybe something they could start on their own before welcoming an outsider in.
Sure. Well, a lot of the recorded practices, both audio and video, would certainly, be suitable in current circumstances. So that would be a consideration to do, is to, bring together or to offer those kinds of recordings to staff and other employees.
Great. Great. And then we had a couple of folks too also ask, can this be used with children? And they had one person ask in an organizational setting, but then someone also said, even if I don't talk about job at home, it can affect our kids. So do you have any insights on how children can utilize this?
Sure. In fact, more and more yoga is being incorporated into the schools, and so and certainly can be done from home. And certainly, it's the kind of practice that parents and children can engage in together, which is actually a very nice thing to do for families. Is to sit and have some movement, breathing, and quiet time together. So yeah, there are all kinds of ways that children can be engaged in the practice, ways that are fun, that make it fun for them. Again, lots and lots of online resources showing how this can be done. So I will certainly list some resources there for children and families.
Yeah, just folks, I see some of the stuff that you're asking around resources. So ideas around issues like ADHD or post-traumatic stress. All of these seem to be popping up for folks. And so we will definitely get that list of things you're interested in over to Aggie and make sure that we can try and get you connected to some. Aggie, I also just had a question as it relates to what we're going through now as a country, as the globe, and utilizing yoga and mindfulness in situations where we feel like we have very little control and are very big. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about centering yourself, even if you're in a situation that seems like it's too big or inescapable or things like that.
Right. And I know this is a very common experience, in the face of the pandemic that we're living through, that and also feelings of grief and loss. And so the overwhelm at times can be really significant. So for any kind of grounding practice, so really, I think I'll borrow a term that Lindy and Elaine used last month, which is gravitational security. So really, feeling the ground beneath your feet in whatever way helps. So really just in feeling into your body. So, doing simple things like just, placing your hands on yourself, placing a hand on your heart, one on your belly, and being as present and welcoming to the feelings that are arising as you can. And using their, specific kinds of, depending on who you are, your personality and all of that, small kinds of things that you can do, using your breath as a focal point, using a mantra or some kind of, inspiring aphorism that you say to yourself, over and over again as a way of grounding and soothing and calming your system. I mean, these are just some simple ideas, but I think the underlying practice is one of grounding and simply being present to whatever is arising, in as non-reactive a way as possible. And for some people, that kind of overwhelm, it's so agitating that movement is really one of the best things that can be done. So, going out, taking a walk, riding your bike, doing something vigorous can help to sort of, release a lot of that sort of pent up, anxious, worried energy in the body and mind.
Great. Then I'll end us with one question, since we have a lot of folks from organizations, and this is something we see with a lot of our trauma-informed work. They have one really great champion in an organization who might be sort of battling or dealing with administration or higher ups who they need to convince to give them buy-in, to say, like, this is something we should incorporate. Can you talk a little bit about, if you have examples or suggestions around what are some ways that the folks here at this webinar can utilize the knowledge they've gained today to go to their boss, their managers, their board, and say, this is what we need to incorporate into our practice here?
Yeah, and I think the thing to do is go into the research and be able to show some of the senior management, the decision makers, what the evidence shows about what these practices actually do and how supportive they are of the people who are working for them in the organization, and how they can do things like, reduce absenteeism, increase focus and concentration, all kinds of things that affect work productivity. There's one study in particular that one of my teachers was involved in, specifically on stress in the workplace, that I can send to you all, that shows some pretty compelling evidence for yoga, in particular the breathing practices that are especially good for people to use to reduce stress or to manage stress.
Great, yeah. So folks, I see some of y'all are still typing in things you would like to learn more about. Please feel free to do so. I am taking note of everything, and we'll send it to Aggie, and we will do our best to get those resources to you. You will receive a follow-up email with all of the things you've heard about today, though, and as well as my contact information, Aggie's contact information. But Aggie, I want to thank you so much for this. This was great. And then, as I've said earlier, in the time we're living in right now, I think it's a great resource for folks to have on hand. So really, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure. So happy to be here. Thank you again for inviting me.
Of course. Well, thank you, everyone. As I said, you will be receiving a follow-up email from me in a few days. You will also receive a certificate of completion for attending the webinar. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative, and we hope you can join us for our next webinar. Thank you again, and be healthy and well. So thank you, Aggie.
Okay, you bet. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.